When did my peaceful sanctuary become a playground for squatters? And how far will I go to reclaim not just my home, but my sense of self? The sun blazed through the half-closed blinds, illuminating the chaos within my home, an offense to every ounce of sanity I had left. There, sprawled across my once pristine couch, were the squatters, undeniably proud of their illicit occupation. I could practically hear the snickers buried in their self-satisfied chuckles as they lounged about, sipping what I deduced was someone's leftover coffee, abominably cold and painfully familiar. Why do I now have a jigsaw puzzle of mismatched people making themselves at home in my sanctuary? My sanctuary. The irate fury bubbling inside me felt like a hot pot ready to explode. A deep breath, I reminded myself, because I had to think, and I needed a plan A, plan B, and, heck, even a plan Z if I was going to uproot these interlopers from my life. 911. What's your emergency? The mundane voice on the other end seemed to lack the necessary sense of urgency. I could almost hear the echo of a donut shop in the background, the officer's instinctual call to sugar, and sprinkles inevitable in such a dull morning. Well, sir, I replied, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I just returned from a lovely week-long getaway, only to find a group of delightful squatters who seem to think my home is their five-star resort. Can you send over some heroes to evict them? The lack of interest was palpable, the monotone delivery of the dispatcher serving only to heighten my indignation. Turns out, the facility meant to protect me had more limitations than a third-rate action film. Sorry, sir, but there's nothing we can do here. Nothing they could do? Was it too hard for them to glimpse the absurdity unfolding before me? The injustice was so thick you could spread it on toast, and I seethed at their apathy. I could feel Clara Jenkins' vibrant, meddlesome presence creeping like smoke around the edges of my mental battlefield. That unwelcome neighbor had an uncanny knack for mixing herself into my business, despite how many times I attempted to dodge her colorful blouses and even more colorful opinions. Oh, sweetie, she would all but coo whenever I spotted her on the block. It's just a shame what happened to your little house of cards. Must be so hard for you to find proper help. If I ever needed extra motivation to reclaim my territory, that was it. Clara's micromanagement hadn't dulled my resourcefulness. If anything, her unsolicited critiques had honed my resolve like a knife, sharpening against a whetstone. I couldn't help but chuckle darkly at the thought. Right now, I needed every ounce of razor-sharp wit I had, and the slightest hint of that pompous tone would send me spiraling into a vortex of rage. Maya Torres. I felt my heart flutter with relief as my friend entered the chaos, cutting through the tension with her professional demeanor like a knife slices through slightly burnt toast. Dressed to the nines in her neatly pressed attire, she had that innate ability to make any situation feel like a boardroom negotiation, rather than a scene out of a twisted sitcom. You called me for legal support, she said, her voice firm amidst the squatter ruckus. Now let's plot our course toward vengeance. Legal revenge would require a carefully orchestrated plan, one that would showcase the full extent of their entitlement, while making it abundantly clear that I'd fought a battle worthy of a superhero flick. As Maya flipped through her documents, my pulse quickened. Every word she spoke was like cheering a battle cry. I was poised to reestablish not just my rightful claim, but my belief that justice could prevail, even amid this calamity. My skin prickled with anticipation as we plotted like masterminds, concocting some grand scheme of retribution surging through my veins. I would dig into the checkered history of these squatters, draw upon every resource Maya could muster, and lay the groundwork to turn this ludicrous situation into a legally binding narrative where I once again held the pen to my story. I envisioned the courtroom, a stage where I would raise my voice, infusing it with raw emotion and razor-sharp wit. I would deliver my lines with the perfect blend of outrage and humor, parading the audacity of these interlopers before the judge, like the baddies they truly were. Oh, how I relished the thought of it. With every suspenseful twist, I could almost hear my epic score swelling beneath me, the drums of justice thumping in perfect cadence, rousing my spirits for the fight of my life. When it came to reclaiming my home, I recognized it wouldn't just be about presenting evidence. It would require an arsenal of passive-aggressive emails, strategically placed notes, and, most importantly, that unyielding emotional force driving me forward. I would flank my legal arguments with tales of my genuine loss, of how my sanctuary had been tarnished by ignorance, mirth, and all-out entitlement. Maya and I would take this to the podium, and Clara Jenkins would have no choice but to listen. Like the leftover coffee my squatters had dared to sip, they would brew my fury to a boiling point and watch as I poured myself back into power. What could be more gratifying than discovering that every small infringement might accumulate into one grand display of comeback? Could these squatters truly think they could just waltz into my life? The planning stage became a whirlwind of caffeine-fueled excitement and strategies, each one aiming to flip the perspective, one that would expose their shamelessness while restoring my sense of home. Legion would come, not only in the form of Maya's legal prowess, but also through the symbiotic network supporting my reclamation. I began to envision my home once more, a place free of audacious intruders and filled only with genuine warmth. As I imagined the day when the court would finally recognize my undeniable right, I grasped the swelling determination within me, charged by the righteous wrath of 1,000 fire ants. "This is it," I screamed, a fierce thrill coursing through my body. I would reclaim my home from this undesirable circus. Could victory be just around the corner? The first task was simple yet monumental: gathering evidence. Maya and I launched ourselves into the chaos of my home like two detectives in a bad noir film, scouring the remains of what was once my domain, transforming the artist's studio into a makeshift war room. The squatters, apparently preoccupied with equating my pristine furniture with a playground, barely noticed the conspicuous noise of chairs scraping on the floor. I stood back as Maya meticulously noted every violation: scuzzy footprints on the carpet, cigarette butts strewn willy-nilly, and food containers that harbored life forms I was certain had yet to be named. My tolerance for their audacity flickered in and out like an old light bulb threatening to burn out entirely. "Can you believe this?" I exploded, tossing aside a paper plate like it was a grenade. The sheer affront to my dignity had me questioning my sanity. These parasites think they can treat my home like a greasy diner? Unbelievable! As we navigated the minefield of my squatter-infested living room, I summoned my inner warrior, channeling every ounce of disbelief and frustration into our discovery mission. Every article of evidence shared its own incredulous story, like the bright yellow donut box belittling my existence as a formerly respectable homeowner. Clearly, someone hadn't embraced adulting quite yet. Like a budding horror movie, the montage evolved, and my righteous indignation transformed into a wicked joy as I realized I was uncovering a treasure trove of absurdity that would obliterate their weak claims. "Look at this," I yelled triumphantly, brandishing an empty half-gallon of strawberry ice cream like I was holding the sword of a defeated king. "It's a trophy of neglect." I'll be sure to add squatter gastronomic preferences to my list of evidence. Maya couldn't suppress her laughter as I danced around the living room, my entrance morphing into a theatrical spectacle of justice, teetering somewhere between ridiculous and revolutionary. After gathering our assortment of artifacts, it was time to strategize. We set up a war table with nothing but determination and sweet revenge in our hearts. Maya's legal expertise became a beacon of light, illuminating my path through the murky shadows of entitlement. "We'll present this evidence in the light of their misbehavior," she explained, her professional demeanor grounded like a gravity-defying force. "Their history isn't just a series of unfortunate events. It's a crime scene waiting for a spotlight." I nodded vigorously, knowing every ludicrous story would reinforce my rightful claim. The thought of dragging these squatters through the court process filled me with an almost poetic satisfaction. I clutched the edges of the table, picturing their faces contorting into confusion as I laid bare the absurdity of each infraction. I'll parade their entitlement like a banner, with glittering testimonies showcasing each crime against my home. I cheered, my voice booming as Maya gave me a proud nod. As the hours melted into days, our bond tightened, and soon our makeshift war room evolved into a home base of camaraderie. We took on the squatters, rallying like an army fueled by passion and vengeance. I transformed into a document detective poring over property laws and case studies, and the research unveiled a peculiar loophole that twisted the typical eviction narrative. It was deliciously ironic. A wet blanket tossed over the audacious squatters. Furthermore, The social media storm that I ignited with snarky posts about my ongoing battle became a source of community engagement. Neighbors who previously minded their own business began chiming in with shared experiences and their own horror stories about uninvited guests. The tide was beginning to turn, and I could feel my confidence swelling with each supportive comment, tagging Clara's meddlesome self in the background. Say goodbye to peace and hello to homeowner activism, I quipped, feeling as though I was on a reality TV show and ready for final redemption. But as noble knights bearing shining armor on our quest for justice, we came across the dragon, the court date. I nearly collapsed into panic as it neared. The anticipation of finally facing the squatters, with their flimsy justifications and audacity, kept my heart racing like a runaway train. My stomach churned as the day approached, but Maya's presence quelled my fear like the soft flicker of a candle illuminating the dark. "This isn't just a courtroom," she said, her voice steady and strong as she imparted that all-important pep talk before battle. "This is an arena. Focus on how completely absurd their claims are. We'll expose them for the entitled imposters they are." Enthusiasm bubbled within me, and yet dread nibbled at the edges of my resolve. "You mean I'm not the only one who thinks washing a sock in my kitchen sink leaves a lasting impression?" I smirked, recalling a moment from my research that had sparked both laughter and incredulity. "Remember, Jordan, you're reclaiming your kingdom." Finally, standing in the courtroom, my heart raced as my name echoed like thunder. This was it, the moment where I would take my rightful place as the spearhead of justice. Maya, poised beside me, worked to channel my disbelief into passion, urging me to step forward without trepidation. I watched as the squatters shuffled into the bright chamber, shocked expressions couched in ignorance, and I marveled at their audacity once more. A kaleidoscope of feelings surged through me, mental images of them lounging idly amidst my home's chaos, their smiles painted on with self-delusion. In my heart, a resolution solidified. I would make them understand the weight of their entitlement. A palpable energy filled the air, and as my voice rose, I unleashed a force fueled by the strife of homeowners everywhere. You thought you could stroll into my life, bathe in privilege, and rob me of my sanctuary? As I stormed through my account of justice, I realized that the battle lines had shifted dramatically. The courtroom's attention was riveted, not merely on my plight, but on the outrageousness born from this surreal debacle. With each word, I portrayed not just a story of survival, but a call to arms against complacency, ignorance, and the belief that rules only applied to someone else. Even the mighty Clara, clad in her quintessential blouse, watched my defense unravel like the fabric of her entitled facade. Perhaps now she would come to terms with how flippantly authority had been undermined, or better yet, become an unwilling cheerleader for my cause. The drama unfolded like an unstoppable wave, crashing menacingly against their half-hearted defenses. This was a tale that demanded an audience, and I could practically see the gears of destiny shifting as the gavel fell. Would chaos prevail, or could justice finally loiter in the halls of my reality? As I stood poised before the judge, heart racing like a caffeinated squirrel, I could practically taste the anticipation in the air. My mind raced through the playbook Maya had so expertly crafted. "You are not just defending your own honor here," I reminded myself, pumping invisible adrenaline into my veins. "You are the herald of countless homeowners wronged by those who think entitlement wears a crown." The courtroom, an odd blend of formal suits and judicial robes, crackled like a live wire, charged with the raw energy of injustice waiting to spill forth. There they were, the squatters, grinning smugly, of course, their entitlement cloaked in a facade of nonchalance. It was like watching a poorly made sitcom, where the characters were oblivious to the catastrophe of their existence. "Your Honor," I began, letting the authority of my voice echo through the chamber. "What I present here today is a classic tale of audacity, clashing with reality, a narrative so brimming with entitlement one could mistake it for a modern fairy tale, one of entitled squatters, harboring delusions of ownership in a home they've turned into a petri dish of chaos." I heard gasps from the audience, and my heart did a little jig. Ah, yes, offense well taken. If there was one thing I had learned from this soul-crushing saga, It was that exaggeration could be the sharpest weapon in any conflict. I continued, vividly painting the portrait of my basilisk-eyed squatters nestled among my belongings, like they were characters plucked straight from a social media influencer's worst nightmare. Let's take a moment to consider, when entering a home, should one expect to find their personal belongings turned into a trash heap or ripe banquet? I gestured towards an evidence board whose atrocities were nearly too graphic to comprehend, and the judge squinted, perhaps trying to impede the unwelcome images flooding into her mind. I proceeded to testify about the damage they had wrought, about the time I had come home to find an impromptu rave happening in my living room with dubious smells wafting through the air, insinuating a neon haze, like a flashback from freshman year college. They've turned my sanctuary, I proclaimed dramatically, into a glorified frat party. And I assure you, Your Honor, nobody wants to reenact their youth among a legion of unsanitary intruders. The cornered squatters exchanged uncomfortable glances, their camaraderie melting like ice cream under a midday sun. But I wasn't just there to roast their lack of respect for property. Oh no, I was here to set the record straight, to unmask the very nature of entitlement that lay entwined in their claims. Pivoting on my heels, I drew attention to their haphazard proof, a collection of half-hearted receipts and notes they concocted, like a class project gone horrifically astray. Your Honor, I continued, one eyebrow raised, this so-called evidence is as flimsy as a wet napkin after a barbecue, and frankly, if it weren't so tragic, it'd be hilarious. My determination surged as I shared snippets of their questionable living conditions, armed with verbal jabs that could easily make a stand-up comic envious. With every pointed observation, I built my case like a strategist preparing for an epic battle. The judges nodded at the gravity of farce before them. As the opposing counsel opened their mouth to present their counter-argument, I felt my heart race anew. Oh, the drama, the audacity. The defense's approach was a literal clown show of justifications and excuses, drawing on the theme of, "we didn't mean to," while they artfully dodged the real issue like matadors evading bulls. Ah yes, classic squatter tactics. Play the victim while simultaneously squatting in someone's dreams. As they leaned on the facade of living life freely, I couldn't help but relish the irony of it all. Gentlemen, I interjected smoothly, inserting a scathing dose of sarcasm, your free-spirited living sounds remarkably akin to vandalism without consequences. What a crime I hadn't even heard of. My retort garnered not a few chuckles around the room, the internal smirks feeding my fire as I envisioned my momentum building. Maya beamed at my tenacity, and I silently thanked her for guiding me through this battle every step of the way. I felt emboldened by her unwavering loyalty and lived experience echoing in my mind. You're not just a man reclaiming a home, you're a beacon of what homeowners should demand. And so, as I gazed upon those hapless squatters, I flipped my metaphorical cape and prepared to drop the final bomb. Your Honor, if the very idea of squatting in someone's home without due regard for decency and cleanliness isn't a crime, then what is? Shall we allow the low-life antics of today redefine the landscape of property rights tomorrow? This was not simply about a house. This was a battle for dignity against a tide of absurdity that had threatened to drown me whole. These words hung in the air like ripe fruit ready for picking, and I could practically feel the collective gasp echoed throughout the courtroom. My closing remark lingered, brimming triumphantly with optimism and righteous indignation. Justice was shifting. Flames of resurgence crackled with every accusation made, and the moment of reckoning danced tantalizingly close. I stood victorious, not just for myself, but for every homeowner who had ever found themselves in a hapless toss-up against entitlement masquerading as freedom. Could it be? Were we on the brink of turning the tide in this whole mishmash of chaos? The gavel loomed on the horizon, and I could almost hear the anticipatory breath of fate. Was it time for justice to take center stage? In the silence that followed my impassioned tirade, time unraveled like an awkward balloon animal at a child's party, each second stretching tauntingly as the judge leaned slightly back in her chair, her brow furrowed in contemplation. I could hear my own heartbeat, thrumming like a drumline, accompanying a parade of injustice. In that moment, the room was suffused with a murky tension, electrified by disbelief and spite as the squatters' defenses began to crumble. A sense of savage delight surged within me. The same gloating energy these interlopers had wielded against me was now cascading like a waterfall of justice, drowning their confidence in waves of deserved disdain. I had entered this fray an unwitting victim, but now I was a gladiator, armed with truth and wit. Would I secure the victory I craved, or would I succumb to the bureaucratic apathy that often cloaked such matters? The grotesque spectacle took several turns as the squatter's lawyer, a haphazardly dressed man who looked as if he had just crawled out from under a bridge, began to stand and offer counterpoints that sounded absurd even in my irritated mind. "Your Honor," he cooed, looking as if he might melt into a puddle of entitlement at any moment, "these individuals have been through an overwhelming period of hardship and technically possess adverse possession rights." Quote, I chuckled internally at his dilapidated logic. The notion that hardship grants one ownership of someone else's hard-earned dreams was akin to saying a thief could waltz around a jewelry store because they were having a bad month. The crowd stirred, amused, some even stifling laughter, their ribs shaking at the utter absurdity of dancers, unified in a circus of misplaced aspirations. Riding on a wave of confidence like a seagull surfing an updraft, I seized the opportunity to interject. "Hardship?" I scoffed, bolstered by the sentiment of the room. "Is that what we're calling it today, folks? A colorful euphemism?" I didn't realize living in my space, my sanctuary, was listed as an open house for anyone who fancied a dip in a pool of misery. A ripple of laughter erupted, creating an atmosphere that tasted like the sweet nectar of vindication. Even the judge cracked a smile, a fleeting moment of amusement passing across her stern face, a hint of humanity peeking through the legal armor. This was my stage, and every charismatic quip and jab felt like a step closer to not just reclaiming my home, but restoring some semblance of order in the chaotic universe of squatter politics. As I continued my passionate soliloquy, the squatters barely disguised their irritation. They exchanged furtive glances as their bravado began to ebb, draining like a punctured balloon on the floor. I wanted to school them in civility, to explain that mere occupancy does not equal ownership, but I restrained myself. Perhaps the act of turning my home into a no-rules rave was their idea of fighting adversity? I mused audibly, forcing everyone to conjure the image of drunken chaos, where one's belongings danced perilously close to utter ruin. If that's your battle cry, I fear we might need to redefine the social contract. The words flowed like a river, splashing against the rocks of complacency, alarming and delightful in equal measure. But amid the laughter and terror of oblivious squatters, a low murmur of, "What's going to happen next?" pulsated through the crowd. I felt it deep in my gut that their underlying panic was about to reach boiling point. Eventually, their lawyer dropped the feeble act of desperation and decided to go for broke. "This whole situation is a travesty. Just because the homeowner wants them out doesn't mean they should be," he bellowed, a web of indignation woven into his voice. I could feel a collective shudder rippling around the room. Watching those squatters squirm was like witnessing an artist create a masterpiece of horror, a brutal reminder that entitlement, when unchecked, often leads down dark, confounding alleyways. As their lawyer finished yet another sad attempt to spin the narrative in their favor, I knew something had to give, and I could practically taste the victory ahead. My carefully curated points were supported by irrefutable evidence, pictures exhibiting their horrendous living conditions, testimony from neighbors who had watched the ridiculous soap opera unfold through my windows. I motioned toward Maya, who wore a satisfied grin, her eyes glistening with the knowledge that we were on the cusp of justice. "Your Honor, I called upon the universe to grant me strength. If these squatters believe that their mere presence empowers them to claim my property as their own, then surely we should open the gates to all who feel victimized by reality. Why stop at homes? Let's start offering their takeout leftovers a permanent nest too." In that charged courtroom atmosphere, my rallying cry of a closing argument thundered through the room, a cocktail of sarcasm and righteous indignation coiling around every word. The gavel would come down, and it would mark not just a verdict on my property, but a remonstration against the excesses of entitlement blaring like foghorns across our society. Would the judge see through the charade and grasp the subverted narrative at play? The question loomed in the air as a charged moment, an electric sigh resonating through the audience. The squatters now pale of face. Had they underestimated the sheer ferocity of losing what they presumed to own? I stood. I waited. Justice, where art thou? As I stood in that courtroom, surrounded by the delicious tension that tinged the air, I could feel the eyes of the onlookers boring through the squatters like lasers. Murmurs of discontent bubbled like a boiling pot, each comment reaffirming that I was not alone in this uproarious endeavor against injustice. The squatters stiffened, their delusion of ownership evaporating as fast as smoke in the breeze. I could practically hear the faint sound of gears grinding in their minds, an unsettling realization dawning upon them that they'd overstepped in their jubilant assumption of ruling my home. The crowd, sensing a shift, buzzed like a hive disturbed, their excitement charged with the promise of watching the mighty tumble, a self-righteous glee swelling within my chest that resonated like the crescendo of an epic symphony. Maya leaned in closer, her whisper cutting through the mounting cacophony, as she riffled through her own stack of meticulously compiled evidence. "This is all we need," she assured me, her voice rich with conviction. "Just keep your composure, Jordan. Let them overextend. Let them dig their own graves deeper." I met her gaze, absorbing the reassurance she radiated like a beacon. With thoughts swirling like popcorn kernels in an eager microwave, I nodded. Forget the squatter's melodrama. This was my show now, and I would relish every minute of the chaos that unfolded, squeezing truth from each laugh and snort echoing in the courtroom like a fleeting applause. The dice were rolling, and they were trembling beneath the unwarranted weight of their audacity. When the judge finally raised her gavel, reverberations of anticipation rippled through the crowd. It was an echo of great promises, an ominous sound that signaled the eventual return of justice to its rightful dwelling. With an elegance that betrayed her previous aloofness, she glanced over the stacks of evidence, barely concealing a flicker of intrigue. My heart raced. Would she uphold the sanctity of ownership or crown the incompetent squatter extravaganza a success? My inner monologue gleefully imagined the judge wearing a superhero cape as she swooped in to save the day, banishing the bespectacled squatters back to whatever shabby reality they hailed from. I stifled a laugh, a mere mortal engaged in an epic war against a battlefield of unrivaled absurdity. As the judge prepared to assess the ruckus, the squatter's lawyer, a man adrift in a sea of desperation, rose again, likely rehearsing a final thrill of theatrics. "Your Honor," he bellowed, a desperate attempt to wrangle a scrap of dignity from the chaos. "We can't deny that these individuals have acted as if they've been living here in established comfort." Now it was my turn. "Living like kings on borrowed time indeed," I retorted, unable to resist the urge to pile on the sarcasm. "Might I recommend a fashion show to showcase their sense of decorum? I hear every reputable home deserves a little charm, especially when the occupants wear their entitlement as a costume." The courtroom erupted, rallying behind my emotional jousting. I was riding high on the momentum, darting zingers like arrows from a crossbow. But the legal furies in that room were countered by waves of uncertainty as the judge examined her options. The tension was palpable, as if the whole world was leaning forward, craning their necks in anticipation. The judge's contemplative gaze bore down on the evidence, the plucky squatter's aspirations crumbling like stale bread. Sensing my opportunity, I powered through the riotous laughter, locking eyes with the judge, my voice bursting forth like a battle cry. "Your Honor, these squatters have come to believe that living in constant upheaval, trashing my property while hosting drunken parties and guffawing in my living room, is a right conferred to them by the universe. If that's the case, do I now have the chance to turn my backyard into a sanctuary for abandoned ferrets?" Laughs ricocheted off the wood-paneled walls, a chorus of support pushing my fervor even louder. As my words cascaded like glorious confetti through the courtroom, the squatters' facade of confidence was overtly deflating. I caught the slight twitch of their mouths, an involuntary reaction that signified they either realized their gig was up or were equally horrified by their theatrical demise. The judge, swayed by the absurdity of my quips combined with the steel resolve of my argument, smiled for the first time since the trial began. It was a moment of validation, like a filmmaker capturing the opening credits of a blockbuster with a spectacular explosion. That singular flash infused everyone with a sense of unity, a fleeting second where we were all humans battling the dismal poetry of stark entitlement versus righteous ownership, laughing at the folly of it all together. The squatters knew, deep down, the tide had turned against them. Their bravado dissolved into the ether, like the last remnants of summer. Would the judge nod in agreement and grant me my legal freedom, or would they live to fight another day? As she leaned back in her chair, deliberating with an intensity that seemed to slow time, my heart pounded, the primal beat of a caged warrior ready to rove free or die in glorious combat. In that miniature universe of a courtroom, we were all participants in a grand spectacle where the scales of justice began to titter, ever so delicately, toward one side. Only time would reveal if the moment would be mine. Whose destiny would reign triumphant in this cosmic game of injustice? Or was it already far too late? Time became nothing but a cruel trick when reality and absurdity crashed headlong into each other. The silence in the courtroom swelled with tension, punctuated only by the nervous shifting of chairs and the scattered coughs of onlookers keenly invested in my crusade. It was as if the universe conspired to turn this tenebrous showdown into a gripping drama, where I, Jordan Mills, an underdog by every conceivable merit, suddenly found myself at the center of an epic battle against a caste of squatters whose audacity rivaled that of 18th-century aristocrats. The judge, regal even when encircled by chaos, leaned forward, her gavel poised like a sword about to strike, setting the stage for any last desperate acts from the opposition. Their lawyer was floundering like a fish out of water, desperate to twist facts into a narrative that would save his most ridiculously misplaced clients. Time seemed to stretch like the elastic on my mom's old sweatpants, excruciating and magnificent in equal measure. "Your Honor," the squatter's lawyer stammered as if attempting to relive his own childhood logic games, "you must recognize that these individuals have operated under the assumption that this, their home, is a casual sanctuary." In that moment of ridiculousness, I couldn't help myself. Casual? Casual? You mean it's like a DIY festival for house anarchists, also known as How to Trash Someone's Hard Work in 7 Easy Steps. Laughter erupted from every corner, buoying my spirits higher than a kid on a sugar rush. The laughter became an elusive weapon, a tangible artifact of approval that made me feel stronger, more invincible against this sea of entitled chaos. The judge's brow furrowed, yet a mirthful spark danced in her eyes. It was a clear indication that my comic relief was working far more effectively than any legal argument a polished attorney could deliver in their desperate attempts to salvage these chucklehead usurpers. It was then that I seized the moment like a hawk diving in for dinner. These squatters believe they're the unwitting prodigies of some utopian vision where life is but a tapas plate of audacity served with a side of mischief. But, Your Honor, this isn't eat, pray, love. This is steal, party, and drive me mildly insane. I grinned, feasting on the irony while the squatters squirmed uncomfortably. Just imagining them floundering like fish out of water was deliciously invigorating. I focused intently on the judge, whose expression seemed to crack like an eggshell underfoot. The courtroom began to feel more like a high-octane carnival, where thoughts collided with electric fervor and the ultimate battle of wits hummed like an electric current, ready to zap it all back into place. It was time to finish my grand soliloquy and deliver the pièce de résistance that might push this tidal wave of chaos into a victorious crescendo for the beleaguered homeowner. "Let's talk about rights, shall we?" I continued, conjuring a hyperbolic intimacy with each syllable. It's so easy for the Squatter League of America to exude entitlement about their right to lounge about like the lords and ladies of my living room, yet the fact remains. I leaned forward, letting my voice dip low and punishingly dramatic. "I'm fairly certain that there's no mandate of mise-en-place leisure bestowing them social currency in my space. Or have I missed the memo that suggested one can claim a property simply by enjoying an extended 3-month sleepover?" The courtroom erupted in laughter once more, drowning out the feeble protests from the opposing side as the reality of this collective absurdity settled like smoke. Even the judge stifled a chuckle, masking the tender glimmer of hope that perhaps we weren't just spectators in a gladiatorial arena, but participants in a derisive comedy confronting ultimately hollow bravado. As I churned out my final flirtation with courtroom justice, I could sense victory teetering close to where I stood. Your Honor, if they are indeed the pioneers of an unwritten right to commandeer homes, could I request the next available slot on the next season of Squatters Got Talent? Perhaps we could showcase their groundbreaking ability to sabotage property values. Or are they simply waiting for someone to roll back the clock to a time when stealing was a freer occupation? The laughter ricocheted off the walls, inflating my resolve as I saw the squatters shrink into their seats, visibly deflated by each quip that rained down upon them. I basked in the ridicule, every jest a tiny victory against their evident entitlement, reveling in the realization that I had become not just a homeowner, but a living, breathing monument dedicated to justice, served with a side of scathing humor. It was precisely in that moment, the stillness swelling amid riotous laughter, that the judge finally took a deep breath and regarded me with the kind of gravity typically reserved for the final moments of an epic saga. "Mr. Mills," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "your passion for your home is admirable, and it's evident that you've fought this battle with both wit and the indomitable spirit of an ardent defender. However, I must ensure the proceedings are grounded on facts before I make my ruling." A universal sigh of anticipation swept through the courtroom, a breathing space before the inevitable conclusion, since, after all, every epic must eventually reach its climax. My heart thudded wildly, caught between the worlds of hopeful elation and nightmarish dread. Was the moment finally here? Would the weight of justice tip into my favor like a glorious flip of a coin? The judge leaned back and considered all the convoluted evidence, and my performance, the embodiment of righteous fervor, next to the very absurdity that had consumed not just my home, but also my sanity. An avalanche of thoughts cascaded in my mind, dreams of reclaiming my sanctuary, mixed with a sharp stream of sarcasm that begged for one last chance to emerge gloriously victorious. With a mountain of nonsense seeming impossible, yet so tantalizingly close, I felt that deep-rooted hope simmering just beneath the surface. At long last, her hammer descended. "I hereby grant you the eviction notice you seek, Mr. Mills." A flood of astonished gasps burst forth, contrasted by uproarious cheer rising among the weary spectators. Had I finally triumphed against the tide of entitlement, an ending befitting every emotionally harrowing saga? Or had I simply survived a battle, with the true war still ahead? The universe seemed eager to unfold adjacent tales, each infused with the promise of redemption yet unknown. The sense of elation was palpable, a scintillating rush that enveloped me like a warm embrace. As I stumbled out of the courthouse, the cheers of friends and supporters echoed in my ears, each shout a resounding affirmation of every emotion I'd bottled up over the last few tumultuous months. Maya was there, her proud smile radiant against the backdrop of potential chaos that had hung over my head for what felt like an eternity. "I told you," she exclaimed, half laughing, half shouting, while hugging me so fiercely it nearly knocked the breath out of me. "You've reclaimed your fortress." A fortress? In my mind, I could almost see myself in a medieval coat of armor, valiantly protecting my property against the marauding forces of, well, frankly, poor decision-making and misguided entitlement. I couldn't help but chuckle at the ridiculousness of my own imagined heroism. But with victory came an unexpected weight, a heavy veil of contemplation snaking around my jubilant spirit. The squatters, now ventures in absurdity and clowns on a laundry list of miscalculations, had simply become casualties of a larger issue, one infinitely more complex and heartbreaking than my personal plight. While I had been embroiled in fighting for mere walls and windows, thousands of others were desperately living on the street, tangled in systemic failures and societal indifference. Holding tightly to my burning conviction for justice, my heart began to race with a new mission. What if that victory could be transformed? What if I could pivot from righteous fury into a catalyst for change? My mind was ablaze with potential. Maybe, just maybe, my newly reclaimed home could serve as a platform, a little beacon of hope for the community. Still buzzing from the night's thrilling events, I fired up the grill, launching my so-called "Welcome Back BBQ" like a celebratory war cry. Friends began to trickle in, armed with sides, drinks, and a far too exuberant enthusiasm mirrored only by my own bubbling joy. The flames danced hungrily, smoky aromas filling the air as I slipped into the easy rhythm of laughter and camaraderie. Everyone, Maya, Clara, I may have reluctantly invited her for comic relief, and a few other friendly faces, gathered, sharing tales from the courtroom hype. Who did what? The unexpected twists, all wrapped up snugly with a ribbon of sarcasm. As I flipped the burgers, I realized I had somehow become the unlikely toast of the town, a homeowner turned warrior, protector of my turf, and the unwitting spirit of comical redemption for those present. Can you believe how ridiculous they looked? Clara smirked, grabbing a plate and loading it up like a buffet line at an all-you-can-eat tragedy. What were they thinking? Moving into your place like it was some free vacation rental? I could feel her sharp tongue rubbing against my earlier frustration like a salve, tempting but just too damn mischievous for my taste. Oh, you mean the charming squatters who assumed my home was an all-inclusive resort for drifters, I replied, matching her sass. I can just imagine their nightly ritual, hauling takeout containers instead of sleeping bags. Laughter erupted around the BBQ as Clara elbowed me playfully, but my mind flickered back to that nagging thought about change and possibility. In the hours that followed, laughter softened to reflective murmurs. The irony of it all dawned on me. The bigger battle was no longer in the courtroom, but in the hearts and minds of our community. Maybe I could convert the basement into a shelter, or provide resources for those in need, I mused aloud, sharing my thoughts over a now half-eaten tray of barbecue wings. Maya looked at me, eyes sparking. "That's brilliant, Jordan. You could become the blueprint for neighborhood assistance." The idea exploded in my mind like fireworks, illuminating the twilight with pure adrenaline. I was no longer just a bystander, but potentially a beacon of change. A warrior still, but one whose sword bore the emblem of compassion rather than just battle scars. The night wore on, illuminated by laughter, warm smiles, and a newfound purpose that everyone could share. With every clink of glasses and every explosion of chuckles, I felt the layers of resentment and anxiety shed like old skin. As I stood there, just an average guy in faded jeans and a t-shirt heavy with grill smoke, I found myself immersing in a sea of potential collaboration. Ideas about community forums, local initiatives, and grassroots organizations began swirling in my brain, matching the flames flickering against the periphery of my former stronghold of despair. Was this victory truly about reclaiming my home, or was it the opening act to a greater narrative, a saga that soared far beyond my own petty grievances? As the stars popped like tiny fireworks overhead, I couldn't help but feel a broader sense of kinship bubbling up, a collective responsibility swirling in the atmosphere uniting us all. "We have to do something," I exclaimed to those huddled around the fire pit, their faces lit with encouragement. "Let's find ways to build bridges rather than fences. Let's shift the conversation about home ownership to mean something more." Gallant proclamations whirled through the air like confetti, and amid the warm glow and friend finals, resolute laughter bubbled beneath surface tension. Who knew that fighting off squatters would awaken such a powerful call to action? My heart raced with a wild dream, leveraging my reclaimed home for wider justice, ignited by both victory and empathy. Standing there, awash in the sound of sizzling meat, laughter, and solidarity, I couldn't help but grin, imagining how I'd take the chaos of my recent fight and transform it into momentum for change. After all, from the ashes of struggle often arises glorious rebirth, doesn't it? Tomorrow, I'd begin the real work, not just as a homeowner, but as a compassionate guardian, building a remarkable narrative that extended beyond the walls I so fiercely loved. Yes, I would take the absurdity I'd weathered and wield it like a torch of hope, lighting a path to better understanding, partnership, and, in the grandest sense, breaking the relentless cycle of hardship. Who knew reclaiming a house could do so much more than merely put a roof over my head?